This video is for informational and commentary purposes only. All opinions expressed are based on publicly available information and are not intended to defame or harm any individual. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we dive deep into the explosive confrontation that's shaken up Washington, D.C., don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with more political showdowns and insider breakdowns. Let's get into it. Washington, D.C. is no stranger to political storms. But even by Capitol Hill standards, what unfolded in the days leading up to the now infamous hearing was extraordinary. It was a week marked by whispers in corridors, frantic staffers, late-night strategy sessions, and a palpable sense of confrontation building beneath the surface. The temperature was rising, and it wasn't just because of the summer heat. Inside the sprawling and marble-covered halls of Congress, lawmakers from both parties were growing restless. Accusations of corruption, misconduct, and partisanship were being hurled across committee rooms and cable news networks with increasing frequency. And while the public may have been growing weary of the usual political back and forth, those within the power circles knew something different was brewing, something explosive. At the center of this brewing storm were three very different political figures: Schiff, the longtime Democratic congressman from California; John Kennedy, the blunt and quick-witted Republican senator from Louisiana; and Jasmine Crockett, the outspoken Democratic representative from Texas. Their paths were about to collide in a way that would capture national attention. Schiff, a figure etched deeply into the landscape of modern American politics, had built his reputation on precision.com and a steely dedication to holding power accountable, particularly during the Trump impeachment proceedings. But over time, critics had begun to challenge his methods, questioning whether his pursuit of justice had at times become overly theatrical or politically motivated. For many Republicans, Schiff symbolized everything they believed was wrong with how Democrats handled oversight. On the other side of the aisle, Senator John Kennedy had carved out a very different persona. Folksy but razor-sharp, Kennedy had a way of disarming even the most prepared witnesses in Senate hearings with his Southern charm and dry wit. Beneath that good old boy demeanor, however, was a lawyer's mind and a political strategist's instinct. He didn't just ask questions, he set traps. And this time, his target was clear. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, represented a newer generation of Democratic lawmakers, passionate, bold, and unafraid to speak truth to power, even within her own party. While Schiff and Kennedy were veterans of the political stage, Crockett was an emerging voice who had already made waves for her no-nonsense approach and unapologetic defense of marginalized communities. She had recently called for a new kind of leadership, one less focused on drama and more committed to results. But little did she know she was about to find herself in the middle of one of the most dramatic moments in recent congressional history. The week started with rumors. Journalists embedded in Washington's political circuit began hearing murmurs about a major clash coming during the upcoming oversight hearing. Some said it involved classified intelligence. Others believed it was a retaliation for leaked testimony. Whatever the case, something big was clearly in motion. In the days leading up to the hearing, there were signs that all wasn't well. Schiff was seen leaving a secure intelligence briefing looking tense. Kennedy skipped a scheduled public appearance, reportedly to prepare for a high-priority hearing. Crockett was unusually quiet on social media, a rare silence from someone known for her outspoken presence online. Capitol Hill reporters began pressing for information, but most aides remained tight-lipped. Behind the scenes, there were frantic calls between party leaders. Aides were rewriting opening statements. Legal teams were being consulted. The hearing's security was upgraded. This wasn't going to be a routine check-the-box event. This was the kind of high-stakes political theater that could shift narratives, end careers, or ignite movements. And then the hearing day arrived. The sun had barely risen over the Capitol dome when the media began setting up outside. Protesters and supporters from both sides lined the barricades, holding signs, chanting slogans, and bracing for what they sensed would be a pivotal moment. Cable news went live early. Anchors hinted at exclusive revelations and unfiltered exchanges. The public's attention was locked in. Inside the hearing room, the atmosphere was unlike anything seen in months. Lawmakers took their seats earlier than usual. There was an unspoken tension, a sort of pre-fight silence that hung in the air. Even seasoned political reporters admitted the room felt different, heavy, expectant. The gavel dropped. From the very start, it was clear this wouldn't be a typical hearing. The questions were sharper, the body language more aggressive, and sitting side by side on the panel, Schiff, Kennedy, and Crockett were all poised, each ready in their own way for a confrontation. None of them could truly control once it began. What no one fully realized in that moment was how their individual roles, Schiff's defensiveness, Kennedy's challenge, and Crockett's moral clarity would not only define the hearing but ignite a national conversation. Their collision wouldn't just create headlines. It would expose the raw, emotional, and often chaotic underbelly of American democracy, a system still grappling with truth, power, and the deep divisions threatening to unravel it. This was the calm before the storm, and everyone from the highest-ranking senator to the youngest congressional aide knew that what was coming next would be remembered for a long time. The hearing room was packed. Every seat was filled. Lawmakers, aides, journalists, and political observers all tightly packed into the chamber like spectators before a championship fight. The tension was thick, the silence deep, but the energy was electric. Something was about to happen, and all eyes slowly turned toward one man, Senator John Kennedy. As he adjusted his glasses and leaned into the microphone, the entire room went still. His voice, unmistakably Southern and deceptively relaxed, cut through the silence like a blade. Kennedy wasn't here for formalities. He wasn't here for political theater, at least, not in the traditional sense. He was here to confront, to challenge, and, some believed, to dismantle the credibility of one of the most visible Democrats in Congress, Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff, Kennedy began. In his signature slow drawl, "You've said a lot. Over the years, you've accused people. You've promised evidence. And more than once, you've stood before the American people and told them things that frankly didn't hold up." The room tensed. Schiff didn't blink, but a flicker of discomfort passed over his face. Kennedy continued, this time more directly. "So I've got to ask you, sir, do you stand by your past statements, particularly those regarding the Russia investigation and the so-called irrefutable evidence you claim to possess?" It wasn't just a question. It was a direct shot, the kind of pointed accusation meant to put Schiff on the defensive. And it worked. Adam Schiff, long known for his stoic demeanor and careful choice of words, leaned forward, his tone measured but laced with irritation. "Senator Kennedy." Schiff replied, "I've always acted in the interest of national security and truth. The evidence I referred to was based on classified intelligence at the time, information that remains sensitive. I stand by the assessments I made, which were consistent with what the intelligence community understood at that time." But Kennedy wasn't done. He smirked, the kind of smirk that suggested he'd been waiting months, maybe years, for this moment. He flipped open a worn leather folder and pulled out a stack of transcripts, quotes, and press clippings. "Let me read this to you," he said, his voice suddenly sharper. "There is direct evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia." That's a quote, Congressman Schiff, from you, on national television. And yet, time after time, investigations came up short. So again, was that evidence ever real, or was it political theater? Gasps echoed around the room. Schiff's calm facade began to crack. "You're selectively quoting me, Senator, and while I understand your desire to score political points, don't do that." Kennedy interrupted, voice rising for the first time. "Don't paint this as political theater. You owe the American people an explanation, not deflection." The two men stared at each other, a rare moment of pure political intensity with no script, no prepared talking points, just raw confrontation. Cameras captured every second. Social media exploded and commentators struggled to keep up. As the exchange unfolded, for a moment, it looked like the hearing would completely derail. Other lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Staffers whispered to one another. The moderator, clearly uneasy, attempted to restore order, but the momentum had already shifted. What followed was a rapid exchange, a volley of statements, rebuttals, and jabs. Schiff, "I've never misled the American people, Senator. What I've done is expose wrongdoing where others were afraid to look." Kennedy, "And what you've done is drag this country through years of partisan warfare without accountability." Schiff, "That's rich coming from someone who's defended the indefensible on his own side." Kennedy, "This ain't about party, Congressman. It's about truth. Something this institution used to value." The room was silent again, but not out of peace. It was the stunned silence of people realizing they had just witnessed a moment of political history. Then came the aftermath of the exchange, not in words, but in the reactions. Lawmakers looked dazed. Some Democrats looked embarrassed. Some Republicans looked gleeful. Reporters rushed to send out breaking news updates. But one figure in the room wasn't looking at either of the men at the center of the fight. Representative Jasmine Crockett, sitting only a few chairs away, looked deeply unsettled. She wasn't cheering. She wasn't gloating. Her eyes told a different story, not one of victory, but of worry. It was as if she saw something no one else did. A deeper rot at the heart of the institution. A chamber that once stood for reason, now reduced to a battlefield of egos and grudges. In that moment, her reaction was more powerful than the exchange itself. It was the calm after the verbal storm, and it spoke volumes. As Schiff leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken, and Kennedy calmly closed his folder like a man who had just finished an autopsy. One thing became abundantly clear. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a turning point. A crack had opened in the foundation of congressional decorum, and no one could deny it. What started as political questioning had escalated into something more primal, a battle for truth, perception, and legacy. And it wasn't over. The fallout, the consequences, and the reflections, all that was still to come. But for now, the room was left to absorb what had just unfolded. The masks had come off, the gloves were down, and Congress would never be quite the same again. As the echoes of the explosive confrontation between Senator John Kennedy and Congressman Adam Schiff faded from the hearing room, a heavy silence took its place. It was a silence filled not with peace but with the collective awareness that something irreversible had just happened. The institution, already bruised by years of division, had just taken another public blow. And while the attention of the room centered on the two men who had traded barbs with fire and fury, a quieter but far more revealing moment was unfolding just feet away. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat still in her chair. She didn't react the way many of her colleagues did. There was no whispering to aides, no eye-rolling, no visible attempts to defend or praise what had just happened. Instead, she sat there, her face composed but deeply unsettled, eyes fixed not on Schiff or Kennedy, but on the table in front of her, as if staring into the soul of the very institution she served. It was a look that said more than words ever could: disappointment, frustration, and perhaps even grief. For Crockett, this moment wasn't about political sides. It wasn't about defending Democrats or scoring points against Republicans. It was about the erosion of purpose. She had come to Congress with a mission to represent the voiceless, to fight for justice, and to bring a new energy to the Democratic Party. She was part of a new generation of lawmakers, diverse, outspoken, principled, who believed the system could still be redeemed. But what she witnessed that day shook her deeply. She had watched two senior members of Congress, both powerful, both intelligent, turn what was supposed to be a serious oversight hearing into a personal battlefield. The confrontation had all the drama of a cable news segment, but none of the dignity that public service demanded. And in that moment, something broke inside her. Later that day, Crockett stepped in front of the cameras for an unscheduled press availability. The press corps, sensing her discomfort during the hearing, flocked to the podium. Everyone expected her to either defend Schiff or condemn Kennedy, but what they got was something much different, something raw, honest, and profoundly human. I watched that hearing today as a lawmaker, she began, but also as an American, and I have to tell you, I was disturbed, deeply. Her voice didn't waver, but there was a noticeable heaviness behind it. Her eyes, still tired from the emotional toll of what she'd witnessed, scanned the crowd of reporters. We are sent here, every one of us, to uphold the Constitution, to legislate with integrity, and to be good stewards of democracy. But what I saw in that room today wasn't governance. It wasn't oversight, it was a spectacle, and I refused to pretend otherwise. Her words pierced through the noise of partisan spin. This wasn't a carefully crafted party message. It wasn't rehearsed, it was personal. Crockett wasn't just disappointed, she was calling for accountability on a moral level. She wasn't pointing fingers at Kennedy or Schiff as individuals, but at the culture of dysfunction that had turned hearings into arenas and lawmakers into gladiators. I've been in rooms with grieving mothers who lost their sons to gun violence, she continued. I've sat with working-class families who can't afford health care. They don't care about who wins a shouting match on Capitol Hill. They care about whether we're doing our jobs. It was a statement that cut through the tribalism of politics and reached the public's raw nerve. She was saying what millions of Americans felt, that the people's business had been hijacked by performance art and ego battles. Back in the hearing room. Her words lingered like a shadow dot. Schiff, once calm and collected, now looked conflicted. Kennedy, ever unshaken, didn't respond publicly, but aides said he quietly acknowledged Crockett's comments as a fair point. Behind the curtain of outrage and bluster, even seasoned lawmakers couldn't ignore the weight of what she had said. Her statement didn't just go viral, it sparked conversations. Cable news commentators called it a moment of clarity. Progressive leaders praised her courage. Moderates called for more lawmakers like her. Even some conservatives acknowledged the refreshing honesty of her remarks. But perhaps most importantly, ordinary citizens exhausted by years of chaos found in her a voice that transcended politics. In classrooms, in diners, in online forums, people shared clips of her speech, not because it was fiery, but because it was real. She had named the unspoken truth that many Americans had felt for years, that Congress had become too performative, too distracted by drama, too disconnected from the people it was supposed to serve. In Crockett, She didn't ride the moment. For headlines, she didn't grandstand. She quietly returned to work, attending briefings, meeting constituents, and preparing legislation. But something had changed. Her role in that hearing wasn't just as a witness, it was as a moral compass. Asterisk that day, she became more than just a rising star. She became a symbol of what leadership should look like when the cameras are rolling, and when they're not. The confrontation between Kennedy and Schiff may have captured headlines, but it was Jasmine Crockett's disturbed silence, and her powerful clarity afterward, that reminded the nation what Congress is supposed to be about, not ego, not theater, but service. And in a time when cynicism runs deep, that reminder was more than refreshing, it was necessary. Asterisk, the hearing had ended, but its aftershocks were only beginning. As lawmakers filed out of the room and staffers packed up their notes and laptops, the building itself seemed to hum with the residual tension of what had just unfolded. It was more than a confrontation, it was a national moment, and it was already being weaponized. Asterisk, before the microphones had cooled, the story had splintered into 100 versions. Asterisk, cable news panels fired up instantly. On one side, conservative commentators hailed Senator John Kennedy as a truth-teller, a no-nonsense Southern patriot who had called out the lies of the so-called deep state Democrats. On the other, liberal voices defended Adam Schiff, describing him as the calm in the storm, a man who had endured years of baseless attacks while trying to preserve the integrity of the intelligence community. Asterisk, but what made this different from other political clashes was that this one had a witness the public couldn't ignore, and she didn't play by either side's rules. Asterisk, clips of Jasmine Crockett's solemn reaction and powerful post-hearing speech were quickly ripped, clipped, and reposted across social media, not just in political circles, but everywhere, on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and in private group chats. Asterisk, you could see it in her face. One viral tweet said, "That wasn't a political reaction. That was a human reaction. She's tired. We all are." Asterisk, cable news shows began running side-by-side footage, Kennedy grilling Schiff, Schiff trying to respond, and Crockett watching in silent disbelief. It became a visual metaphor for America's fatigue with chaos. Asterisk, but the media wasn't the only institution shaken. Asterisk, inside the Democratic caucus, Schiff's standing began to shift. Long seen as an immovable pillar of Democratic oversight, he now faced questions even from within his own party. Some younger members, inspired by Crockett's reaction, began whispering about the need for a new tone in leadership, not less aggressive, but less performative, less about headlines, more about impact. Asterisk, Adams, brilliant, no doubt, one anonymous aide told reporters. But sometimes he plays into the drama. And we just saw where that gets us. Asterisk, Schiff, for his part, didn't respond publicly. But behind closed doors, sources said he was rattled, not by Kennedy's questions he had faced worse, but by Crockett's silent judgment. According to one colleague, Schiff reportedly told a staffer, "I didn't expect that from her. She made me reflect." Asterisk, on the Republican side, Kennedy rode the wave of attention with practiced ease, appearing on several conservative talk shows. He repeated a version of his hearing comments with even more flair. Asterisk, all I did, he said on one program, was ask a man to be honest with the people who pay his salary. That's not an attack. That's called doing my job. Asterisk, he was praised as the new face of Republican oversight, a strange title for a veteran senator, but one that fit the moment. Still, not everyone in his party was fully on board. A few moderate Republicans worried privately that Kennedy's aggressive style, while entertaining, risked further dividing an already fragmented Congress. And then there was the public polls, taken in the immediate aftermath of the hearing, showed something fascinating. A majority of respondents, regardless of political affiliation, said they were troubled by the tone and conduct of Congress during the hearing. But even more interestingly, the most positively viewed figure from the event wasn't Kennedy or Schiff. It was Jasmine Crockett. Asterisk, she didn't say much during the hearing. But when she did speak afterward, she struck a chord. Asterisk, Americans are used to shouting. They're used to finger-pointing. But what they're not used to is sincerity. Crockett's visible discomfort, followed by her calm but piercing words, created something rare. Trust. Asterisk, soon, her inbox was flooded with emails. Constituents from across the country, not just her district, thanked her. Some offered support. Others asked her to run for higher office. Asterisk, the Capitol hadn't seen anything like this in years. A moment dominated by two powerful men had ended, with a woman younger, newer, less covered by the media, rising to national prominence, not by attacking anyone, but by standing still and telling the truth. Asterisk, meanwhile, activists and advocacy groups latched onto her message. Asterisk, this isn't about Schiff or Kennedy. One activist wrote in an op-ed, it's about a broken political culture. Jasmine Crockett didn't just see it, she felt it, and so did we. Asterisk, the moment also sparked new calls for reform. Think tanks and ethics watchdogs used the hearing as a rallying point for updated standards in congressional conduct. A bill was even proposed, ironically by a bipartisan duo, to create mandatory de-escalation and decorum training for members of Congress. Asterisk, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Congress had become so combative, so consumed by showmanship, that lawmakers were now being asked to take lessons in basic civility. Asterisk, but perhaps the greatest fallout wasn't seen in headlines or legislation. Asterisk, it was in the mirror each member of Congress was forced to look into. For some, the hearing was a badge of honor, a symbol of political combat done right. For others, it was a line crossed. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was a moment of painful clarity. Asterisk, she didn't come to Congress to play referee in a battle of egos. She came to solve real problems. And that mission, interrupted for a moment by political theatrics, had just become more urgent. Asterisk, because if a government spends more time arguing about who's right than doing what's right, then what's left? Asterisk, in the days following the explosive hearing, the U.S. Capitol looked the same from the outside, stately, solid, unshaken. But inside, something had shifted. The confrontation between John Kennedy and Adam Schiff wasn't just a viral moment. It had become a fault line, one that split not just Democrats from Republicans, but lawmakers from their own sense of trust, direction, and purpose. Asterisk, in the Democratic cloakroom, conversations grew more tense. Schiff, once untouchable in his standing, now found himself facing an unspoken coldness from a handful of younger colleagues, not out of disloyalty, but out of disillusionment. His allies still defended him publicly, but in private, the questions were growing louder. Asterisk, why did he walk into that trap? Asterisk, why give Kennedy the opportunity to turn a hearing into a courtroom circus? Asterisk, is Schiff losing the room? Asterisk, the very people who once stood shoulder-to-shoulder with him during the first impeachment proceedings were now unsure if he could carry the weight of party leadership in a post-truth, post-decorum Congress. Asterisk, meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett was receiving quiet visits in her office, not just from progressives, but from centrists and even a few replicants. Some came to offer support. Others came to ask a more personal question: was it as bad as it looked? Crockett, diplomatic but direct, didn't sugarcoat her thoughts. Yes, she told one member, it was worse, because it wasn't just about what was said, it was about what we've become. That sentence hit harder than most speeches. Across the aisle, Republicans weren't immune to the inner tremors either. Senator Kennedy's fiery performance had won him praise from many, but not all. Some GOP lawmakers, especially those focused on policy, not personality, feared the long-term consequences of turning every hearing into a battle royale. Asterisk, I get it. One Republican congressman confided, it plays well on TV, but where does it end? Are we just content to be stars in a never-ending political soap opera? But the drama didn't stop in the Capitol. Donors, advocacy groups, and major political fundraisers began calling. Party leaders with a clear message: get control of your members or we'll stop writing checks. Asterisk, political operatives in both parties scrambled. The Schiff-Kennedy clash, amplified by Crockett's viral reaction, had become a symbol of Washington's dysfunction. Fundraising emails referenced the hearing. PACs launched video ads. Social media pages were flooded with attack clips, remixes, and memes. Asterisk, but under all the noise was a deeper problem. Trust was eroding. Asterisk, not just trust between parties that had been broken long ago. This time, trust was dissolving within the parties. Asterisk, among Democrats. Some began whispering that Schiff's credibility had taken a permanent hit. A few even floated names of potential replacements for future leadership roles, people who could command respect without inviting spectacle. Asterisk, among Republicans. Kennedy's rise began to unnerve more traditional members. He's running the party like it's a talk show, one conservative strategist warned, and eventually, that comes back to bite us. Asterisk, even staffers, the silent backbone of Congress, were talking. In cafeterias and corridors, they spoke not just about the confrontation, but about how it felt. The word they used most: embarrassing. One aide summed it up like this: the public thinks Congress is a joke, and last week, we confirmed it. Asterisk, and yet, in the middle of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, quiet, composed, and now burdened with unexpected moral authority. Asterisk, she had not asked to be the voice of reason, but when the fire broke out, hers was the only voice not trying to fan the flames, and that changed everything. She began receiving quiet invitations, think tanks, advocacy coalitions, even private meetings with senior Democrats to help shape a new vision for how Congress could function in the future. It was as if her moment of disturbed silence had cracked open a space that no one knew was needed, a space for truth without theater, for accountability without spectacle. Asterisk, in one closed-door caucus meeting, Crockett finally spoke. Not with emotion, but with clarity. Asterisk, we don't need more warriors. We need more workers. People are suffering out there, and we're arguing in here. If we can't see the disconnect, we've already lost. Asterisk silence followed. But this time, it wasn't empty, it was thoughtful. Asterisk, not everyone agreed with her. Not everyone liked what she was saying, but even those who rolled their eyes couldn't deny one thing. The crowd outside the Capitol was now listening to her more than most of them. Asterisk, she hadn't just observed the cracks. She had become the voice warning that they would become breaks, and her warning was being heard. Asterisk, by the time that week ended, things weren't quite the same. Lawmakers returned to their home states and districts. Some shrugged off the moment, others carried it with them like a weight they couldn't explain. Asterisk, but for those paying close attention, staffers, journalists, even the public, the shift was clear. The Kennedy-Schiff clash may have ignited the drama, but it was Jasmine Crockett's disturbed clarity that turned it into a reckoning. Asterisk, the walls hadn't fallen yet, but now, everyone could see the cracks. Asterisk, by the time Monday morning came around, Washington, D.C. was no longer bracing for fallout, it was living in it. The confrontation between Senator John Kennedy and Representative Adam Schiff had already burned through headlines, social feeds, and every major network. But what lingered wasn't the yelling. It wasn't Schiff's sharp defenses or Kennedy's unapologetic Southern thunder. It was Jasmine Crockett's silence. That brief, powerful moment where she sat motionless, visibly disturbed, no longer shocked but disappointed, had become the still point in a storm that showed no sign of stopping. And in that silence, a truth was exposed. One Congress couldn't ignore. One America couldn't look away from. Asterisk, because when the fire of politics burned too bright, it wasn't the loudest voice that broke through. It was the one that didn't need to shout. And now, that voice was speaking again. A full week after the hearing, Congress reconvened, under the weight of public attention, not from voters demanding a side to take, but from citizens tired of the whole damn thing. Theatrics, finger-pointing, nothing real. Asterisk, Crockett arrived to the Capitol like she always did. No entourage, no press statement, just a stack of papers, and a quiet, determined stare. Asterisk, but this time, everyone was watching. Asterisk, when she rose to speak on the floor, the chamber fell silent, not out of respect for her seniority, but because of what she had come to represent, truth without ego. Asterisk, she looked around the room, not at Schiff, not at Kennedy, not at the party leaders, but at every single lawmaker who still believed Congress had a purpose. And then she spoke. This chamber is not a stage. These seats are not thrones, and our microphones are not megaphones for personal vengeance. They're lifelines for the people who trusted us to represent them. Asterisk, there was no applause, no shouting, just listening, and that was new. Crockett continued, her voice low but firm. Asterisk, we are in the middle of a trust crisis. Not with each other, with the people we claim to serve. They've seen the clips. They've heard the drama. But what they haven't seen, what they're begging for, is progress. Asterisk, at that moment, even the usual cynics seemed to pause. The aides lowered their phones. The press gallery leaned forward. Asterisk, she wasn't asking for unity. She wasn't offering political solutions. She was delivering a mirror. Asterisk, you want to yell? Do it in private. You want to campaign? Do it back home. But in here, right here, we owe people more than Semites. We owe them our work, we owe them our seriousness. Asterisk, some lawmakers nodded. Others stared at their desks. Asterisk, but no one walked out. Asterisk, and when she ended her speech, she didn't slam the podium. She didn't smile for the cameras. She simply folded her notes, stepped down, and returned to her seat. Asterisk, and that, ironically, made her louder than everyone else in Washington. Asterisk, that same evening, a national poll dropped. It showed that 68% of Americans across party lines agreed that Congress is more concerned with performance than progress. But what stood out most was the open response section. Thousands of Americans were asked to name one lawmaker they trusted after the hearing. Asterisk. One name appeared over and over again. Jasmine Crockett. Not because she shouted the loudest, but because she told the truth when it was hardest, when the noise was loudest, and when no one else seemed willing to see how far things had fallen. Asterisk, and as the country moved forward into another election cycle, another wave of headlines, something had changed. Asterisk, Congress would go back to business. Schiff would survive the controversy. Kennedy would go on television again. But the people watching, they had seen something different. Asterisk, they had seen a young lawmaker disturbed by dysfunction, unwilling to play along, and unafraid to speak plainly. Asterisk, and that mattered. Asterisk, because in a system addicted to drama, one quiet moment of clarity can break through more powerfully than 1,000 loud ones. Asterisk, so as the final chapter closed on this political saga, one truth remained. The confrontation may have belonged to Schiff and Kennedy, but the legacy, asterisk it belonged to Jasmine Crockett and to every person watching from home who was waiting for someone to finally say, enough.